Hey everybody, hope you had a good weekend and you got a chance to read one another's papers. Peer review is an essential part of the process, and it's important that you get a sense of what one another are doing, compare and contrast each other's papers, and sometimes you can see mistakes that others make that you don't necessarily see in your own work. The problem is that because this is the first time many of us are doing this, at least to the degree of specificity that I would like you to do it here, not always is the feedback we get from peers helpful. So one of the things I want to do in this talk right here is show you how we might use the rubric to go through our revision process. I surveyed everyone's papers. Nobody's is perfect. Nobody's is done. So you're going to want to use this week to get more in depth with your thinking. Again, I have optional meeting times if you want to sign up. Do give me 24 hours notice. Well, let's go through this talk right here and see how we might revise our papers now that we've got something down, now that we've got a draft down. I want to remind you that the handout has a grading rubric, and it looks like this, and it's on the second to last page of that handout. And it gives us the four main areas where we want to focus our revision. And it's also the four main areas that we're assessing in the writing program. We're consistently looking at your ability to make arguable points, your ability to find evidence and frame it, to organize it in a logical and pleasing manner, and to not make a whole lot of mistakes. As you can see, those top three, they are worth more in credit and also worth more in intellectual value than the presentation. That said, when I see a sloppy paper, the chances that those other things are being done correctly are pretty slim. So don't take anything for granted. But we're going to focus most of this talk on how we can revise to compensate for errors in higher order thinking as opposed to sentence level stuff. The first question you always want to ask is your point clear? If we look at the first, I'm actually going to move my camera up here. If we look at the first row of that rubric, that's what the central claim is. It's asking whether or not your point is clear or not. And we're going to grade this on a scale from 0 to 5. If this way of looking at the grading rubric is unclear to you, or if it's not helpful, these are some questions you can ask. Is your central claim specific? But more specifically, is it about the primary texts? If I had to sort of rank the points I make the most in student writing when I'm giving students feedback, it's that their arguments are not about the texts. They're about love or about society or about something big and vague that you can't prove. You need to make sure that the primary texts are the things that you're arguing about. The next thing you want to look at is whether or not it's arguable. And this should be review for everybody. This is the criteria for an effective central claim. You want to ask whether or not you are restating an obvious fact. You want to make sure it's explainable and it suggests some sense of structure. So you got to ask the question, does the evidence support what you're arguing? But also, have you defined that crucial issue main idea? I'm getting a lot of GroupMe texts. I'm getting a lot of emails, students asking, what does it mean to define your terms? I'll just direct you back to the video that I posted. But it's really important that you do this because this is what's going to give the proof of your research essay some sense of structure. So when we're looking at explainable and structural questions, we are looking at that. Have you broken down your big idea into those 3 points? So that's what we want to look at is the division section of your paper and whether or not you're making a clear specific claim about the texts and how they're doing what you're claiming that they're doing. The next question you want to ask when you're looking at that rubric is, how are you handling the evidence? That's the second row. And you can read through the rubric at your leisure. But I want to talk specifically about this idea right here. Framing our evidence. This is another email and GroupMe text that I'm answering a lot is what does it mean to frame evidence? What does it mean to set up a quotation frame? And that is that ICE move that we were talking so much about before we went fully online. So you got to ask the question, is every quotation introduced? That introduction is a 2-sentence move. First, you need to give your audience a contextualizing statement that gets them up to speed with what was happening in the story. If it's your primary text that you're writing a quotation frame for, if it's a secondary text, you got to get them up to speed on why the source is relevant and what is the issue that it's speaking to. The second thing you're going to need to do is have that attributive phrase and make sure those attributive phrases, if you're writing about primary texts, are attributing it to characters. We very rarely want to do so-and-so writes. Instead, we want to have a character observes. We want to have the story, the narrative doing the action. If you are framing and giving attributive phrases to secondary texts, you want to have so-and-so writes, so-and-so argues, and so-and-so observes. Want to make sure that every quotation is appropriately cited, and that's when you're making sure that you're punctuating things appropriately and that you also have an in-text citation with accurate author spelling and pagination. I can't tell you how often I see students misspell authors' names in their in-text citations, so make sure you are proofing that and making that correct. Finally, you want to make sure that every quotation that you quote is sufficiently explained or interpreted. With a secondary source, that means that you are agreeing with reasons, you are disagreeing with reasons, or you're agreeing with some of what the author is saying or disagreeing with other parts. With a primary source, you got to make sure that you are interpreting the symbol, the scene, or the action. You're not going to agree or disagree with a story or with a poem. Instead, you're going to pull something out of it and you're going to explain how it's illustrating the main point of your research essay. So that's the second part of the rubric, is making sure that we're handling evidence appropriately. We want to look at organization next. That is this section of the rubric right here. One caveat here, some of you are insisting not using the 6-part Cicerone arrangement strategy. That's fine. If you've got a better way than the person who's teaching the class, by all means, do it your way. This is one of the reasons why I say logically and pleasingly ordered. If you want to spit in the face of thousands of years of logical thinking and you're better than that, by all means, do it. But I am teaching you an arrangement strategy that's been pretty successful for a few folks. So I am going to be looking at those 6 pieces, unless you found some way to blow me away with the way that you're organizing things. So the first thing I'm going to look at is your introduction. Are you making a generalization about society? If so, check mark. I'm taking points off. Are you illustrating the main issue in some way? We want to make sure that you are getting your audience ready to hear whatever it is you're going to be arguing about those primary texts. Next, I'm going to be looking at the narration portion. Some of us have done a lot of research, secondary research, on our main idea, and it's taking us away from the main purpose of the essay, which is to interpret the text. So we want to make sure that you've got the best, most relevant evidence in your narration portion. If you are going off on 3, 4, 5 paragraph tangents about, the state of Iraqi politics or whatever, and you are actually writing about 2 primary texts, that's too much time spent on secondary evidence. You want to make sure that everything you have in there is relevant. When I do look at your division, I'm going to be looking to make sure that it has the primary texts and the terms of your argument in there. The proof section, you got to ask yourself, are you following the same pattern and methodology for each primary text? In the organizational lecture that I posted, I suggested going summary, introduction to the author, summary, term 1, term 2, term 3, right? You want to make sure that you're covering that pattern with both of your primary texts. You also want to make sure that every paragraph is built around a hero, and that hero is specific evidence from the text. You want to make sure that you're following the 70-30 rule, that 70% of the overall text is your thinking, you're introducing quotations, and you're interpreting them, and the other 30% is quoted material. In our refutation, if you're going to have an refutation, that's a big if. We need to make sure that you've got a specific quotation or contrary interpretation. Don't make something up. Don't say some people might argue or society might say. Don't do that. You got to bring in a specific critic, and then if you bring them in, you have to answer it with a specific scene, symbol, or action from each text to line up with that. We want to make sure that our conclusions are bringing the argument full circle, that you have some kind of call to action or an amplification of your idea at the end. There is no need to write in conclusion in the final paragraph. I know it's the final paragraph because it's the final paragraph, right? I'm not saying that bad writing has in conclusion and its conclusion moves, but it's just a little expected, and 9 times out of 10 you don't need it. Finally, let's look at proof and documentation standards. That is the bottom row of the rubric, and we want to make sure that we have policed the area, that we have a relatively error-free presentation. You got to follow documentation standards. I could give a whole entire presentation on that, but really it comes down to following directions. The number of us that are not looking at the MLA guide is staggering, and I'm going to ding you on it in your final research essays, and it's going to bring your grade down. I do want to talk a little bit about sentence level mistakes. Those of you that had me in English 1101, and we did a little bit of this at the beginning of the semester, it's not grammar, it's grammar, mechanics, punctuation, usage, and style. They are different things. And if you can handle the 20 most common errors, you'll take care of 93% of the mistakes that all student writing has. I've taken the liberty of actually doing a screen grab of these 20 most common errors. I'll tell you right now, a lot of us are doing this one right here. We don't know the difference between its and its. A lot of us are not using commas after introductory subordinate clauses. If you don't know what this language means, go to the Purdue Online Writing Lab. The link's been on our Connect site since the beginning of the semester, and nail this stuff down. The other thing I'm seeing a lot of, people using apostrophes for plurals. There it is right here, the possessive apostrophe error. You do not use an apostrophe for plural nouns. Other than that, I want you to have a great week, and good luck.